All right, well, I think that will cover the stories that we wanted to talk about today. I got a request from someone for us to cover pitfalls for first-time writers. So I think we should maybe go through that a little bit.
All right, let's.
What would you say is the biggest pitfall that you experienced as a first-time writer?
Well, I'm fairly young, and I haven't written a whole lot. So what we lose was really my first foray into writing anything serious. And I'd say the biggest pitfall is not planning ahead. It is the worst thing you can possibly do as a first-time writer is not plan ahead, because if you don't plan ahead, things get out of hand quickly. My story got featured very quickly, and that will overwhelm me. I managed to keep up for about 3 chapters, but then I kind of fell off the map, and that's because I didn't have a set plan. I didn't know where I was going with things for sure, and so that really took away from my writing. And by not having an exact plan, I couldn't. I had to improvise a lot of things, and that really weakened my writing, weakened my pacing, and caused a lot of other problems that have been mentioned. And it's honestly, in my opinion, I wish I had planned it a whole lot more, like I am doing with my other fics I'm working on now. I'm planning them a lot out beforehand. So, in my opinion, the worst thing you can do is not plan out ahead, or at least some. Like, have figure out your beginning, figure out your ending, and then kind of figure out what you're doing. Just don't go in with just an idea. Otherwise, it might not work very well, and it ends up weakening your writing. How about you?
Well, I have a bit more writing experience. I am somewhat older than the average sort of age for bronies. I am 26, which puts me about 5 to 10 years older than most people who are into the show. And aside from that, I wrote a lot in high school. When I started writing fan fiction again, it was the first creative writing I had done since high school. So that meant that I had about an 8 year break or so between writing continuously and then not writing at all and then starting to write again. And so what I really experienced to begin with was kind of mostly shaking off rust, what works, what doesn't work. A lot of people did like my first foray into fan fiction, Rainbow Rambles, which is, I think, some of my weakest writing. And I think that the real problem that I had with Rainbow Rambles was trying to figure out the best way to put things again. I think the big problem with Rainbow Rambles is that there's very little description. It's mostly dialogue, and the description that's there is not very good. And I think that's something that it was my problem. That is a problem that I see with a lot of first-time authors is how to deal with description, how to deal with that at all. One of the things I see a lot is people not going with past tense. I know you can write in present tense or even future tense, that's something that people can do and can make work in fiction. It is excessively hard to do so. It is really, really hard to make present tense or future tense work in fiction. And
I,
the successful ones are kind of hard to read.
yeah, like in my opinion, like I feel like present tense works best when used as a tool in writing, like for emphasis on like a certain part, like maybe a prologue or a scene or a flashback or something like that. Like I don't know, something that's not like your entire story. I feel present tense works better for that. And finding ways to put things is extremely difficult. Not being repetitive, uh, and all and finding the right words so you get the right emotions across is extremely hard.
That's definitely true, and it's something that past tense just kind of works better. And one thing to really focus on in trying to figure out how to write past tense is just in thinking about telling like an anecdote to someone. This is something that happened to you before that you're telling to someone, and you can tell an anecdote in third person. You don't have to tell an anecdote in first person, especially if you heard something, you're telling a story about something that didn't happen to you, which for the most part, when you're writing fan fiction, is what's going on, unless you're deciding to delve into the mind of one of the characters. So it's something that it's I think it's easier to write in past tense. It's easier to do that. So trying to write in a different tense than that doesn't make sense to me because past tense is easier to read and it's easier to write. And aside from tense issues, also really getting in and figuring out how much is too much and how much is not enough description. There's nothing
Mm,
quite as boring as reading a fanfic that describes what one of the main six looks like. We know what Applejack looks like. We know what Twilight looks like, and it's something that even when it's done quickly, even when it's done quickly at the beginning, where you say the the purple unicorn with the six-pointed star cutie mark with indigo hair was lying in bed. Her
it's
name was
all
Twilight Sparkle. Even if it's that
it's
quick.
yeah. It's the lavender unicorn syndrome, which is the nickname the fandom has given to when you it's overusing descriptions for a character that aren't necessary. You don't need to say the prismatic mare for Rainbow Dash. We know what Rainbow Dash looks like. You can say, Rainbow Dash. You can say her. You can say Dashy. You don't want to overuse that type of things. And that's one of the huge problems I saw. Like, some of my friends have me read over their works and edit them, their fan fictions. And, I always see them doing it. Like the lavender unicorn, the orange earth pony. It's one of the biggest problems
Okay.
realizing that everyone knows what you're already talking about. That's one of the best things about fan fiction is you don't have to create your own characters as much. You have something to base it off of, which means you don't have to give the descriptions for these characters.
Yeah, that's definitely true, and it's something. Lavender Unicorn Syndrome is something that I am a sufferer of. Unfortunately, I'm not super bad. I've only been called out on it twice.
The
Uh,
first step is admitting you have a problem.
and I've been progressively working away from it as I go. As the current chapters that I'm writing have it less and less often. And one of the things to really realize as a writer is that even if you're looking over your work and you're seeing the repetition of names, is that names are invisible words. And just like how and the are invisible words. When you read a bunch of sentences that have the words and the in them, you don't notice that those are repeating because they're invisible. When someone reads Twilight, they don't have to stop and think about it. They just instantly know which character it is. So it's not really that noticeable. There are things that need to be varied some that are invisible words, like said and asked are both invisible words. Most of the time, people don't notice them, but you can notice them if they get used way too much due to repetitive sentence structure. If you have a conversation that the way that it goes is hello, said Twilight. How you doing? Said Applejack. I'm doing well, said Twilight. And it just goes like that over and over and over again. It does get noticeable. But it's one of those things that, especially in a conversation like that, it's sometimes better to leave that out. If you have two characters talking, just have them talk. Just do a new paragraph every time it switches who's talking, and it's easy enough to read back and forth without any further description at all. It helps the pacing to do that actually. If
Yeah,
if characters are talking quickly, you just have them switch back and forth without any description at all.
especially if it's something like some fast details that's really important between two characters, like rapid fire, like, oh my gosh, where is she? I don't know. What happened? Oh, etc. Like they're in panic or crisis mode. You don't want to have as many descriptions. You want to have word, word, so you get the intensity across.
And it's just description in conversation is a delicate touch. And that's one of those things that it's hard to explain how to do it so much as it is that as you read things and as you practice writing, you get better and better at doing. Is just figuring out how much description you actually need in a conversation. And if the conversation is slow paced and there's a lot of action going on around it, it's fine to break with it. If you have characters that are talking as they're running through the forest, then even if what they're saying is fast paced, they're also jumping over things and tripping and having things happen to them as they go. And it's fine to break that up with the description of things that are happening. If you do too much of it, if you get too purple in your writing, then you end up slowing down the conversation some, which might work. Maybe you want that to happen. If you don't want it to happen, if you want them to rapid fire back and forth, best just have them rapid fire back and forth. And
Yeah, no, it's and it's also going to depend on your readers because some people like purple prose, some people don't, and some people like their fics to be paced slower, and some like the quick, it moves fast and moves nicely. It all depends on who you are. Like I adore purple prose, I love it, but it's not everyone's cup of tea
it works depending on the story. It's one of those
as well.
things
Yes, yeah,
that if you're using purple prose in a comedy, you should probably stop. Purple prose does not fit very well into comedy unless it is a very dry comedy, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but just keep it in mind that it's something that when it comes to writing prose, there really aren't that many rules. The most important rule that there is that your reader understands what's happening. That's the most important. And if whether or not your story works then goes into if the pacing makes sense, if what you have to say is important. And important can be as minor or trivial as getting a laugh out of someone. And that's the real thing that you're going for is understandability. And sometimes you can get away with that on purpose. I have a very large vocabulary. I like to stretch it out and allow it to kind of walk around and confuse people. And that's okay for the type of story that coming back is. It isn't as great of an idea to use it in things like It's Elementary, My Dear Rainbow, which I kind of cut back my vocabulary to write. It wasn't really that much, but I did avoid some of my larger words in writing it because it doesn't fit with the story.
exactly. It all depends on what you're writing. Like you really have to be able to adapt your writing style to what you're writing and be able to be kind of fluid in how that works. You have to like for me with What We Lose, I saw some comments on on like with issues they had like, you know, there are some weak plot aspects in my story. Part of the reason because I didn't plan ahead, which you should always do. Yeah. Uh, and so, I decided I learned from that and I took that I'm and I really focused on that. So I'd say the most important thing as a new writer is to learn from your mistakes.
Yes, always listen to criticism.
Always.
Unless the criticism is you suck. If someone's saying that, then you can ignore them. But
Yeah,
if they have an actual problem that they bring up with the story, you should listen to them. They might be wrong. And it's one of those things that if you have one person who complains about an aspect while everyone else likes it, it might just be a difference in opinion. But if someone comes and says your story is too fast paced and that's the only comment you get, you should maybe consider that the pacing is too much.
exactly. For me, it was the fact that my plot was a really kind of cheesy and cliche, which it was a problem I'd noticed before, and it had kind of been bothering me, and it really was, like, and it still is. But like I know that, and that's so I'm really trying and focusing on what I'm writing now and my new work and my new chapters to make it, you know, less cliched and more kind of more interesting and more unique. And so just if you learn from your mistakes and keep on keeping on, it really helps your writing.
I think when it comes to fan fiction, specifically when it comes to first time writers, is a length issue. I have
Mm,
seen so many first time writer fics that are under 2,000 words. And it is
I'm guilty.
so hard to actually get anything across in less than 2,000 words. It can be done. There are masterful stories that are told in fewer words. One of the best short stories ever is 6 words long. And that story is For Sale, Baby Shoes, Never Worn.
Oh my God.
Isn't that amazing? That's an amazing short story that gets so much emotion across in 6 words. But that
Holy
is a
crap.
master. That is a master writing that.
Oh wow. Like I've heard the best horror this is an old one, like the best horror story ever told is the last man on earth laid down to go to sleep. No, wait, what is it? I can't remember. Gosh, I have to look this up now. I can't remember what exactly it was.
Well, in the meantime, that 6 word story, that was Ernest Hemingway. So we're not talking about something that, as a first time writer, you should try to do. There is a sense that if you write very purple, if that's your natural inclination is to write very purple, and you have pacing problems, things go too slowly because you spend all this time describing what something looks like, and it's messing with your story, then cutting down on the amount is something that you should think about doing. But for the most part, what most people have is not having enough. They go in, they don't describe things well enough. They describe things by showing, or excuse me, telling instead of showing, which that's something that everyone says show don't tell, and that's not a universal truth. Sometimes telling is important, sometimes telling works better.
The key is balance.
Right, and it also depends on the voice that it's in.
Mm,
I'll tell you one of my favorite actual book series to read is the Dresden Files, and the reason that the Dresden Files is so fun to read is because it's first person from the perspective of Harry Dresden, and Harry Dresden is a character that you just want to hang out with. You want to have a beer with the guy. He's awesome. So when he is telling you what something looks like instead of showing you what something looks like, it is riveting because of his voice, and that works very well. And so it's not true that you should always show instead of telling,
yeah.
especially if the pacing would be messed up by doing so.
I found the shortest horror story ever. It's the last man on earth sat alone in a room. There was a knock on the door.
There you go.
Yeah, it's absolutely. It's like you don't need length. You don't want to shorten everything, but length is not always a factor of quality.
Right, you can definitely have amazing things that are short, but something that's short that's amazing is kind of best left to the professionals. I would never attempt that. The shortest thing that I've really written,
Perfect
uh,
couple.
I don't know. Was the perfect couple shorter than the first chapter of Rainbow Rambles, which was a
Yeah, I'll check.
no original. The first chapter Rainbow Rambles was a little shorter than 4,000 words.
Mm,
So yeah, perfect. And the perfect couple is more of that's almost a joke, and I don't mean that as in it wasn't written to be serious. It was written to be comedic. It was just the point of it was the punchline. And jokes are a type of storytelling, and that's fine. But I mean, so that's something that can be short that works, and you can make comedy work that's short. But even then, in saying so, Rainbow Rambles is a joke that is about 2,500 words long. Whereas I see all these one shots and first chapters that come out that are like 1,020 words long, and it's just
yeah,
there's nothing you can do in that little of a space that really says anything, in my opinion, unless you are a master at writing.
I'm guilty of it myself, actually. My first chapter for What We Lose was, 1,800 words long. I didn't do a whole lot. I established kind of basic plot and left people asking a whole lot of questions. Sure, it was kind of good for the popularity of my thing, but it does not help the writing. And with my later chapters, my last two chapters have been longer than anything else. They've 3,000 and 3,600 words respectively, and I've gotten a whole lot more done in them.
Yeah, and I can be guilty of having long writing, and long writing has its own problems on film fiction. I don't think that all of the viewers on film fiction are particularly major readers, which is not really an insult. People are, in this day and age, are more interested in fast-paced things, things that they a more immediate sort of um, a prize. And so like coming back has, 7,000, 8,000 word chapters. And I'm sure that there have been plenty of people who have looked at that and said, nope. And especially looked at the fact that it's now at almost 65,000 words and said, nope. And that's something that you kind of have to deal with. But especially like on one shots, I mean, you can have shorter chapters. That's fine. I've seen plenty of things work that have 1,000, 1,500 word chapters. I don't think I've ever seen anything work that had chapters that were really under 1,000 words.
Except for vignettes, kind of.
Sometimes most of the vignettes I see that are good break 1,000 words.
True, true.
Sometimes they don't. One of my favorite vignette fics, the rustic and the romantic, have a few that are less that are good.
Yeah.
I really like that, and they're usually very good. But it's still something that I see fix that I will look at them and they'll have their first chapter, and their first chapter will be 1,080 words or 1,020 words, and the second one is 700 words, and the third one is 300 words, and then they get back with one that's 800 words, and you look at that, you say, what can you possibly have said in 300 words that warrants its own chapter? I write 300 words setting up the intro to the chapter I'm writing. And
Yeah.
I'm purple. I'm guilty of writing purple prose.
Pros.
It's definitely something that I am guilty of. But as a result, because of my pacing, I usually go for the longer chapters on coming back so that when someone reads it, they feel like something actually happened in the chapter.
Well, I think that might just about cover it, unless you have anything you want to say.
I think characterization is the last
Oh,
major
oh, thank you
pitfall.
for catching me. You're completely right. Characterization's another last big one.
Yeah,
I'm silly.
I can't tell you the number of times where started reading something and it could be promising in terms of its writing style. You can tell that whoever's writing it actually knows how sentences are put together. And that's something else that's a big problem, is that if you don't really know how to write in English, you should probably learn how before trying to write creatively.
Probably.
You don't have to pay attention to perfect sentence structure all the time. In fact, it's good to break it sometimes, but you have to know how the rules work in order to break them and understand how breaking them changes the feel of something. Where if you have a long sentence that's a lot of choppy, like short phrases broken up by commas, you can have something that feels rushed through. And you can do things like that, and you can understand how they work. And that's good. That's a good thing to do. But if you don't really know the rules, then you usually are going to end up writing something that's an unreadable mess. But aside from that, I've seen ones that have good writing styles that you can tell right off the bat that the writer doesn't like a specific character. And so they write that character to be stupid, and they write that character for the other characters to be mean to them, and they completely fail at what they're trying to do simply because they don't do the character right.
Yeah, like one of the biggest problems I see is in writing Fluttershy, actually.
Yeah.
She's often written as completely weak and spineless and, completely plain and only quiet. And, like, sometimes she's like that, but there's so much more to her character than just that, There's the whole fact that, she'll do all, she'll face all these things for her friends. And, there's all her interactions with the animals and all that. Uh, so, yeah, there's so much more to it than that. And, like, in my opinion, Fluttershy is probably the hardest character to write out of the main six.
And I think that's something that is a pitfall even for writers who are good, who have been doing it for a while. There's a really common thing in fan fiction that is usually referred to as stutter shy, which is writing her with a stutter. Fluttershy doesn't really stutter in the show. You can use it a little bit, but you should use it in the same way that you would for any character who's flustered. If you're writing a character who is flustered by something that's happened, you tend to make them stutter a little bit in order to get that sense of being out of sorts across in it. And Fluttershy can be flustered more often than other characters. So it makes sense to use it slightly more often with her than with others, but don't have her stutter everything that she says. And I see that. I see that in good stories, in stories that are by authors who have written a lot. And it's not because they don't like Fluttershy necessarily. It's just they're writing her wrong. And I think Fluttershy is hard to write in general because some of her mannerisms in the show work really well in a graphic format. You know, you can have her tremble in a graphic format and do it in a bunch of different ways, and it's funny. It's funny to see. It
For
works for
instance, Magic Duel.
right. Her whole like freak out about going out of the bubble was great. It worked very well in a graphic way. And if you can write graphically well enough, you can usually make it work. But one of the things is it gets really repetitious a lot of the time, and to see it in when you're reading it and going through it and having her tremble at every sentence and having her bite her lip all the time and look away and hide behind her mane, which is I can't tell you the number of times I have read the phrase as the yellow Pegasus ducked down to hide behind her mane, or however it's written, just in that happening. I have read that so many times, and it's boring at this point. It's a cliche of My Little Pony fan fiction for Fluttershy to hide behind her mane. Does it mean you can't ever use it? No, you should use it because it's something she does in the show. And you do want to get that across. It's just you don't want to rely on it and you want to use a light touch. And it's something that in my own writing, I've struggled with to write Fluttershy well. And in coming back specifically, I've worked in the way that I've written the characters and the character development that's going on to try and break some of those obnoxious habits of hers, at least in terms of obnoxious from a writing perspective. And that's something that's okay too to do, is to alter characters into different characters, which I've seen that handled very poorly, and I've seen it handled very well. And that's something that if you're going to do it, you need to have a reason behind it. Um, one fic that I do like that's been fairly new just decided that they were going to have Rainbow Dash act differently, and they gave a description at the beginning as to why, and it was kind of unsatisfying. So that's something to be careful with too.
Mm, that really is. Characterization is the most, well, is the base aspect of fan fiction because we all know the characters. So we want to see these characters. And you can change them. You just have to make it believable.
Right. Part of wanting to read about these characters and see these characters is seeing them grow and change. Hopefully into better ponies, sometimes into worse ponies. And
Yay.
and sometimes into the worst ponies can be really satisfying.
Oh,
It's
yes.
really satisfying to read a well done grimdark story.
We will cover this in the Grim Dark section at
Yes,
some point.
without talking about any specific fix, there's nothing quite as satisfying
Mhm.
as watching a character that you really like make a bunch of good decisions that they, or at least decisions that they think are good until they've lost their soul. That's a really satisfying thing to read.
It really is because it's something about seeing the descent coming. For like as the reader, you can like see all the bad choices they're making, but you can totally understand how they would be made. It's like, in forgive me for comparing it to, say, Oedipus the King, if you know that.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Oedipus does what he thinks is right the whole time, and but you can see the descent coming from miles away, but it's so satisfying to watch and read it
Right.
and see it happen.
Yeah, and there's nothing quite like realizing at the end you were rooting for a character who became the devil.
Mm.
There's nothing quite like it because you feel so dirty afterwards. And
And
that's a
yet,
great
it,
thing to feel after reading something, I think.
yeah, no, the fact that something can make you feel like that is that's a sign. That's a sign of successful writing.
Yes. This where we're getting into just basically the heart of why it's important to change the characters, and it's something that you should do unless you're just going for slice of life. And there's nothing wrong with just going for slice of life.
No,
But
like
if
as
you
we proved in today's episode, slice of life fics can be awesome.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things, especially with I think Nos Flutterato, where you get this introduction of these really potentially major changes to the canon. And the end result of it is that nothing's changed. And the purpose
Exactly.
that it gets across is that nothing's changed. And that's really interesting and that's good and that works just fine. But watching characters change is also a good thing. So you don't need to feel like you're hogtied into not moving the characters at all. But you need to know the reason behind them doing it. And just having them change willy nilly is unsatisfying and is the first way to have someone not not read your work. Where they pull it up and they look at it and they say, why is Fluttershy suddenly like completely mean? Or why is Twilight acting so stupid? And if there's no reason for it, you've lost a reader, and you'll lose most of your readers.
And that is that, maybe?
Perhaps. All right. Well, we will be back next week. Next week we are probably going to cover comedy.
Woo! Ha 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 ha.
Comedy fics are awesome, and
Yes.
they can be slice of life or they can be a lot more serious, and we will try and cover at least one of each.
Yep. Probably look forward to another three next week. It looks like that might be the trend.
Yep, 3 to 4, depending on what we're doing.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
uh, we'll see you all next week.
In the words of Yakka Warner, good night, everybody.
Hello, nurse.